I'm Greg Wheatley, and my guest today on Inside Wheaton is Dr. Nathaniel Thom. Dr. Thom is Assistant Professor of Applied Health Science here at Wheaton College and is new on the faculty, just been here about a year, completed 1 year here on faculty. Nate, it's great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you're one of those people that I usually like to ask when you have that short a tenure so far. Just talk a little bit about what you think of Wheaton. You've had 1 whole year to get used to it.
Yeah, it's been great. My family and I just moved here from Southern California, where I was doing full-time research with the Navy and the Marine Corps, and then collaborating with some scientists at the University of California in San Diego. And I really missed teaching. I missed the classroom. And I grew up in a town similar to Wheaton. So it feels like home.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to be a part of the community, and we've enjoyed it.
So you had been a teacher prior to your work with the Navy?
No. Well, sort of. I mean, I taught in graduate school.
So you missed the classroom. You missed being in the classroom.
But and I taught a little bit in graduate school. And I spent a year teaching at Point Loma Nazarene in Southern California, and just really, really enjoyed it. So it's been a pleasure to get back, have that campus feel again. The students just bring so much energy.
And you came from California climate to Wheaton climate in the winter of 2013.
Yes. Yeah.
What a lucky guy.
We will remember it forever.
Yes.
There's no doubt. I grew up in central Wisconsin, so I sort of knew what was coming, but I haven't been in a Midwest winter for a good decade. So it was a harsh.
It was a brutal one.
It was a harsh awakening. There's no doubt.
Talk, Nate, to people who maybe don't recognize the department name Applied Health Science. I mean, that's kind of a fancy title for what? What would they recognize it as?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think some of the things that make us stand out, some of the hallmark features is all of the professors in our department are interested in preventing human disease. We have a heart for that. So, for example, myself in particular, I'm really fascinated by diseases of the brain. And how can we prevent them? What are different behavioral strategies that we can implement to help people have better brain health? Exercise is one that I've studied. Also studied kind of what you would say are some mental skills, cognitive skills training programs. But I would say that's a hallmark feature of our department. A lot of our students, would like to pursue medical school or go on to be physical therapists, things like that. And so we're in a really unique position to prepare them to do that in that liberal arts context.
And we're understanding, it goes without saying, that we've made some pretty great strides in understanding the brain over the last number of years, haven't we?
We have. So we're actually right in the middle of another decade of the brain. So the National Institute of Health, with support directly from the president, actually has set aside, I think it's about $100 million to study the brain. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the second decade in a row where the focus has been on understanding the brain, what it is, what it does, how can we keep it healthy? So it's an exciting time for someone like me who's really fascinated by the brain and gets excited when I get the chance to sort of discover what it does, and how we can modify it.
Whenever you say the brain, that part of our physiology, of course, these days everybody's got to think Alzheimer's.
Sure.
And what an awful thing that is for so many people.
Sure.
Are we making any progress on that?
I think we are. I think it's slow. I think, we have, I guess what I would say are some rough genetic markers. And I think probably one of the most exciting things from my perspective is you look at something like being able to prevent it or delay the onset of it. And there's some really fascinating research out there showing that especially exercise, aerobic exercise, can really help your brain in terms of delaying some of these disorders like Alzheimer's. And that is modified by genes as well. So, we're making progress, and it's exciting.
Do we know at all what it is, even if we don't know how to prevent it? Do we know what's in there causing it? Are we close to that? Or?
Yeah, it's a little bit outside my area, to be honest.
Sure.
We've got some time before, and that's sort of the problem. The exciting thing about brain disorders is that it's a complex organ, and so a lot of times the etiology, the cause of a disease is going to be complex and multifaceted.
I noticed in reading a little bit about you that a lot of your study, your research, your interest has to do with stress. And so obviously that's going to affect our brains in some way. Talk about what you do with research in stress.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in is how can we help people anticipate, respond to, and recover successfully from stress? Because people that do that have healthy brains and therefore healthy behavior. And so that's a complicated thing. We all sort of have different patterns, ways which we respond to stress. Can you change those? Can you modify those? And so the way that we've approached that, the way I've approached that over the last 5 or 10 years, is to take people that respond really, really well under stress and to evaluate them on the neurobiological level. So what's different about them? And so what I was able to do during my postdoc is work for the Navy SEALs, reconnaissance Marines, people that by definition handle
That's high stress.
They handle it exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And so what's different about them? And we found some really unique differences both on the level of personality, but where my focus has been is on the level of the brain. What's different about them? And then obviously the next question is, can we change them?
Right.
Can we take someone normal like me and
not a Navy SEAL.
Not a Navy SEAL, exactly. And can you train me to have a brain that's similar as a Navy SEAL?
Which then I would think, Nate, must get into the idea of, is this nature or nurture? I mean, are they hardwired with that kind of brain, or is it something they're doing behaviorally to encourage that, right?
Yep,
Nate?
exactly. And I think it's a both and type question.
Well, that's very fascinating. Can you give me a little more about that? I mean, what did you find about these men?
Yeah, so you have a neurobiological system in your body that when someone asks you, how do you feel? How are you feeling? This system helps you answer that question. And it's a simple question, but there's a tremendous complexity underlying what your brain is doing. And essentially, it's taking a homeostatic picture of your body, of the inside of your body. Are you well fed? Are you getting enough oxygen? How's your pH balance? Homeostasis. And it's feeding that forward, and you make a judgment on how you're doing.
It's like you have this little dashboard of meters that measure all those parameters, right?
Exactly. Yep. And these guys measure things differently, and they're aware of things differently. And so what we found they can do is they can take that information. Okay, how am I feeling? What's going on around me? And then how do I make decisions that are going to be successful in the midst of stress? And we found that in Navy SEALs. We found similar brain differences in recon Marines, and then also professional adventure racers. And so sort of the next step for me is, what about missionaries? Missionaries that end up in really austere environments. Right. How are they similar? How are they different? Because a lot of these missionaries put themselves in harm's way in a pretty serious light. And so that's kind of the next step for me. And so not only have we shown they're different, we did a large study with the Marine Corps showing we can train those differences.
Interesting.
So we had the Marines go through an 8-week mental skills training program that was actually based on mindfulness. And
what do you mean by mindfulness? Being aware of sort of self-monitoring? Is that?
Yeah, it's being in the present moment without judgment is sort of the most simple definition that I would say encompasses mindfulness. And I think it involves meditation, which as Christians, we're very familiar with. But a lot of it involves paying attention to what's going on internally. So this sense of how do you feel? And then what are you going to do about it? And so we showed if we train people how to do that better, they respond to stress better. Their brains changed, their physiology changed, their behavior changed. To be honest, it was a little bit surprising how profound the changes were.
Is that, so what you're talking about, I mean, from a layman, we've all heard the term biofeedback. I mean, is that essentially what you're doing? You're sort of taking stock of yourself and saying, what do I need to do to change this?
Yeah, you can think of it that way. You're learning how to provide that feedback to yourself. is what it comes down to, because most of us go around not paying a whole lot of attention to it.
We just know we're stressed out.
Yeah. Or maybe not.
Or maybe we don't even know it.
Yeah. I mean, I think some people aren't even aware of how tense their shoulders are, or if they are a little short of breath, or et cetera, et cetera. And then put them in a stressful situation and they're even less aware.
Yeah.
They just respond the way they've always done it,
Yeah.
the way they've seen.
So let's bring that to most of us aren't going to be Navy SEALs. Probably. I think I've given up that dream. I'm a little too old now.
Me too.
But in our daily lives, we know what stress is.
Yeah.
We're in a packed schedule. We're in the rough time of the semester. We've got tests coming at us, papers to write.
Sure.
How does that principle play out in that kind of life?
Sure. I think, in 2 words, know thyself. I think that's where I see a large difference between some of these people that can go into really, really stressful situations, and a lot of them come out better. They're more adapted to do it again. They understand themselves. They understand their personalities. They understand how they respond in those types of environments, what their gifts are, and how to use those gifts. So they do that, which I think is something we could all get better at. Okay, how did I respond the last time I had a big test?
Yeah.
What could I do differently? A lot of times we don't reflect on those things.
Right.
We do the same thing
go
over
right into
again.
it again. Yeah.
And then the other piece is, how did I recover from it? That's another huge difference. So what we see among these elites is they recover very quickly from a stressor. They're able to recognize my heart rate's up, my breathing rate's up, and all the associated physiology, and they can self-regulate that.
Interesting.
Whereas most of us, we kind of get up and stay up for a while. And that's detrimental to your health. It's detrimental to your brain.
Which goes, Nate, I wanted to say earlier, something you said prompts me to ask this. I think a lot of us think about stress as completely negative. I mean, if I could just be rid of stress in my life, that sounds great. That's never going to happen, right? I mean, stress is normal. It's what you do with it and how long it lasts.
Yep,
exactly.
Is that right? Stress is good.
Yeah.
Stress leads to growth if you process it correctly. I think you're right on. We cannot avoid it. We cannot avoid it.
So rather than say stress-free life, maybe we rephrase that and say, proper handling of the stress, right?
Exactly. Yep. Being able to anticipate it, respond appropriately, and recover. That's what you want to be able to do. You cannot avoid it. It's just not possible.
What do you tell your students? And I know you're dealing a lot on clinical levels and research levels, but
Sure.
A student comes into your office and says, Dr. Thom, you teach this. Now I need your advice. How do I live a life that isn't going to be like this? So sort of pastorally or as an advisor, what would you say to a person with that kind of stressful
Sure.
feeling?
I think probably the first thing I say, especially to Wheaton students, is that's normal. Yep, that's normal.
Yeah.
We all deal with it. But how we deal with it is going to determine whether or not we maintain health.
And
so
students here are really prone to that, aren't they? I mean, this is a pretty A-level kind of place, and it's sort of a type A place sometimes. Isn't
Exactly. And I think a place where they come in without having a lot of failure, so to speak.
Right.
And I think I try and encourage them to almost welcome that. And we talk, that's the neat thing we can do when we evaluate the body, is the body seeks balance, the body seeks homeostasis, but it only grows and gets stronger when you perturb that, when you disturb that. So, getting more physically fit, for example, you cannot do that sitting down.
Right.
You have to go out and stress the body and then rest. So again, it comes back to respond, recover, respond, recover. That's how you grow.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. It's painful. It's hard, but we're being sharpened, right?
Yeah. What do you like about the classroom at Wheaton? What have you found here that really kind of gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, so many things. Gosh, if I had to put my finger on it, I would say the students that have figured out how to love learning are really just a joy to be around. The ones that can appreciate sort of knowledge for the sake of knowledge, that's just a pleasure. And the fact that the classes are small enough that I can identify those students and really pour into them is just really exciting. I think that's just, I was programmed that way, so to speak, to enjoy that type of interaction.
One of the things I saw in your material that I made a note to ask you about was your research on emotion, where you compared scenes and faces. Now that's really technical, I think, but something about that caught my attention. I just wonder if you could explain what you're looking at there in terms of emotion.
Yeah. So the reason we did that is when we look at elites, we can sort of break down their abilities in 3 domains. They're better cognitively, so they problem solve differently. They're better at regulating their own emotion, and they're better interpersonally, so sensing what others are thinking and how to manage that. And so as a scientist, we sort of have to break those down and study them on a pretty intricate level. And so that was the point, is how do people differ in terms of the way they view other people having an emotion versus how they have an emotion, and what are the brain structures that support that. So it's basic work, but the application is, once we know how people process these differences, then again, can we train that?
Yeah.
Can we modify that?
Well, as we sit here today, we're in August. It's not long before the semester starts, and maybe that's its own kind of stress for you.
It is.
Should ask you how you're handling that. But, what's the year look like? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, it looks good. This fall, I teach an epidemiology course, which I love. I really learned how to think like a scientist through my first epidemiology course. And so I really enjoy teaching that class. And then the other goal for me is to wrap up some of the summer research that I've been doing. I had a former Wheatie who's now a med student at Loyola working with me on some of the brain data that I've been working with. And then I also had a sophomore French major, actually, who wants to be an occupational therapist, who is doing some research with me as well. So hopefully we can wrap up some of those projects and do some writing and
Well, it's great to have you here. Great to get to know you. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us.
My pleasure.
Dr. Nathaniel Thom is Assistant Professor of Applied Health Science. And by the way, as we usually remind you, if this has piqued your interest and you'd like to know about the department here at Wheaton, maybe for yourself or a student of yours, get in touch at wheaton.edu and find a lot of good information about the applied health sciences at Wheaton College. For Inside Wheaton, I'm Greg Wheatley.